Welcome to Brainwaves and Breakthroughs.
All right, let's dive into something we're all familiar with, but don't always think about too much. Dust.
Yep.
I know. It's that annoying thing we're always trying to clean up. But get this, dust is actually way more interesting than it seems.
It really is.
So in this deep dive, we're going to explore all those hidden sides of dust. And honestly, you'll never look at those dust bunnies the same way again.
You might even start to appreciate them a little.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've got some awesome research to dig into about what dust is actually made of, how scientists and historians use it to solve mysteries, and even some crazy ideas about how it could be used in the future.
The future of dust. Who knew it was so bright?
Right. But before we get all futuristic, let's start with the basics. What exactly is dust anyway?
Okay, so think of it as a blend of the organic and inorganic.
Organic and inorganic.
Yeah, so you've got your minerals, like tiny bits of rock, volcanic ash. There's even dust that came from, you guessed it, space.
Space dust. Seriously. So like the dust in my house could be partly from outer space.
It's possible. A tiny bit, at least.
That's so wild.
But don't get too excited. Most of the dust we find is a bit more down to earth. Things like skin cells, fibers from clothes and carpets, pollen. You even find bits of insects in there.
Hold on. Skin cells. Like my own dead skin.
Pretty much.
Ew. Well, that's both fascinating and kind of gross.
It's true. But it also reminds us that we're constantly leaving little bits of ourselves behind wherever we go. And actually, that's what makes dust so useful for things like forensic investigations.
Oh, right. You mentioned dust can help solve crimes. So how does that work exactly? Like, do detectives actually look for dust at crime scenes?
Oh, they do all the time.
Really?
Yeah. Remember that whole mystery of King Tut's missing heart? When archaeologists opened his tomb back in the 1920s, his heart was nowhere to be found. For years, people thought it had been stolen.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was a big mystery. But researchers analyzed the dust found inside the tomb. And you know what they found? Pollen, from a very specific type of flower. Turns out that flower was used in ancient Egyptian burial rituals, specifically for removing and preserving the heart.
So the dust held the answer.
Exactly. It's like a fingerprint. That pollen in the dust revealed exactly what happened thousands of years ago.
That's incredible. So dust is like a silent witness recording everything. And it's not just ancient history. You're saying it can be used in modern-day investigations, too.
Absolutely. Take the Lindbergh kidnapping case back in the 1930s. Analyzing the dust on a ladder found at the crime scene helped link a suspect to the crime. It contained wood dust that perfectly matched the wood in his attic.
So basically, dust can tie criminals to a crime scene. Just like fingerprints or DNA. It's mind-blowing to think about all the secrets it's holding on to.
It really is. And it's not just crimes. Analyzing the composition of dust can also tell us a lot about the history of a place. Like, imagine studying the dust in a really old building. It could tell you so much about the people who live there, right?
I bet. Like what they ate, what they wore, maybe even what the environment was like back then.
Exactly. It can reveal so much. Scientists have used dust analysis to study everything from the eruption of Mount Vesuvius that buried Pompeii.
Pompeii. You mean the Roman city frozen in time by volcanic ash?
That's the one, and that ash. It's basically superfine dust, right? It's revealed all sorts of details about life in Pompeii, even down to the food they ate and the diseases they suffered from.
That's amazing. So it's like taking a time machine back to ancient Rome, all thanks to dust.
You got it. But dust isn't just about peering into the past. It could also play a major role in our future, especially when it comes to things like energy and resources.
Wait, you're saying dust could be a source of energy? I always thought of it as something we have to get rid of, not something we can use.
I know, it sounds a bit crazy, but it's true. There's this new technology called triboelectric nanogenerators.
Tribo? What now? That sounds super complicated.
It is a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is actually pretty simple. These tiny devices, they can actually use the friction of dust particles to generate electricity.
Wait, so you're saying we could potentially harness the power of dust blowing in the wind?
Exactly.
That's mind-blowing. And you said something about resources, too.
Right. Believe it or not, dust can contain tiny amounts of valuable metals, like gold and platinum.
Really?
Yep. Scientists are working on ways to extract these metals from dust, in a way that's good for the environment, of course.
So instead of digging up entire mountains,
Yeah.
we could just collect dust.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but you get the idea.
That's incredible. I'm starting to think we really need to give dust more credit.
I think so too. It's a hidden world full of possibilities, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
You know, it's kind of freaky to think that all this amazing stuff dust can do, like solving crimes and revealing the past, is also happening alongside a whole bunch of, well, microscopic life.
I know what you mean. It can be a little creepy to think about, right?
Yeah, it's like whole unseen world right there in our homes.
Right under our noses.
So, like, besides those dust mites we always hear about, what other tiny creatures are hanging out in our dust?
Oh, there are tons. Bacteria, fungi. You've even got tiny insects like book lice and silverfish.
Book lice. Like, in my books, they don't actually eat the pages, do they?
Nah, don't worry. They're not really lice, and they're more interested in the mold and fungi that can grow on book bindings, especially if it's humid.
Okay, good. As long as they're not munching on my books, we're good.
Keep your books dry and well ventilated, and you should be fine.
So, besides making my allergies go crazy, what can we actually learn from all these dust dwellers?
Well, the types of microscopic life in dust can tell us a lot about the overall health of an environment.
You mean like,
Okay.
if you find certain bacteria, it could mean there's poor ventilation or something?
Exactly. It's like a little health check for our homes.
So we can learn about potential allergens,
Yeah.
A and D, get a sense of how clean our homes are.
Pretty much. But it goes even deeper than that. There's this whole field of research about the microbiome, which is basically all the microorganisms that live in and on our bodies. It plays a huge role in our health and immunity.
The microbiome.
Hmm.
I've heard of it, but I don't really get what it means.
It's basically like this. Your body is home to trillions of tiny organisms, mostly bacteria, and they all live together in a delicate balance.
So it's like a tiny ecosystem inside of us.
Exactly. And the crazy part is, the dust microbiome, the mix of microbes in the dust, can actually reflect our own microbiome.
Whoa, hold on. You're saying the dust in my home can tell a story about the microbes living on and inside of me.
It's wild, right?
So maybe those dust bunnies aren't so creepy after all. Maybe more like little messengers.
And there's research suggesting that exposure to a diverse range of microorganisms, especially when you're a kid, can actually help build a strong immune system.
So maybe a little dust isn't so bad after all.
Everything in moderation, right?
So don't freak out about every speck of dust, but don't let it take over your home either.
Right. Speaking of which, dust itself is always on the move. It travels all over the globe on air currents.
Wait, are you serious? Dust can travel across continents. Like, the dust in my house could have come from, I don't know, the Sahara Desert.
It's totally possible.
That's crazy.
And think about it. Dust isn't just carrying particles of dirt and pollen. It could also be carrying things like pollutants or even pathogens.
Whoa. So dust from one part of the world could actually be affecting the health of people and ecosystems in another part of the world.
That's right. That's why it's so important to study how dust moves around. It helps us understand how connected our planet really is, and how events in one place can have big impacts somewhere else. For example, dust storms in the Sahara can actually carry nutrients across the Atlantic and help fertilize the Amazon rainforest.
No way. Dust from the Sahara is feeding the Amazon. It's like a giant natural recycling system.
Exactly. It's incredible how interconnected everything is.
It makes you realize that dust is more than just, well, dust. It's a connector, linking us to everything from the microscopic world to the vastness of our planet.
You got it. Even the smallest things can have a huge impact.
So we've talked about how dust connects us to the past, the present, and even the future. But there's one thing I'm still curious about. Is there dust in space?
Oh, absolutely. And it plays a key role in some of the most amazing events in the universe, like the birth of stars and planets.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. We started talking about dust bunnies, and now we're talking about the birth of stars.
I know, right? It's amazing.
It's incredible how something so small can be so important in the universe.
It all comes back to that idea of interconnectedness. Dust isn't just something we sweep away. It's a fundamental part of everything.
So how does it work? How does dust in space create stars and planets?
All right, picture this. Huge clouds of dust and gas floating out in space.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
These clouds can be massive, light years across, and they're incredibly beautiful. When you see those amazing images from telescopes, You know, those nebulae with all the swirling colors?
Yeah.
A lot of times that's what you're seeing. Clouds of interstellar dust.
You're telling me that same stuff that makes my furniture dusty is what creates those amazing nebulae?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Wow.
Now, inside these enormous dust clouds, gravity starts pulling everything together.
Okay.
And as the cloud collapses, the dust particles start bumping into each other. They clump together, and those clumps get denser and denser.
So it's like those dust bunnies under my bed, but on a cosmic scale.
Exactly. And as these clumps grow, their gravity gets stronger, and they pull in even more dust and gas. Eventually, the center of this cloud gets so incredibly dense and hot that nuclear fusion ignites. And bam, a star is born.
So every star we see in the night sky
Right.
started out as a clump of space dust.
Pretty much.
That's amazing. But what about planets? Where do they come from?
Okay, so after a star is born, it's surrounded by this swirling disk of leftover dust and gas. It's called a protoplanetary disk.
A protoplanetary disk.
Yeah. And that's where planets start to form.
So the dust clumps together again, just like it did with the star.
You got it. Over millions of years, these dust particles collide and stick to each other. They get bigger and bigger, and eventually they form planetesimals, which are like the baby planet.
Baby planets.
Exactly. Eventually, those planetesimals crash into each other and merge, and that's how you get full-fledged planets.
So the Earth, everything we know, it all started as dust in space.
It did. It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. We've talked about how dust connects us to the past, present, and future. But what about art? I mean, does dust have a place in art and culture?
That's an interesting question. You know, dust can be a really powerful symbol. It can represent the passage of time, decay, forgotten memories. Think about those pictures of abandoned buildings covered in dust.
Yeah.
It's like a visual representation of things fading away. And artists use that symbolism a lot to create works that make you feel a sense of loss or nostalgia. Like the photographer, Jeff Browse, he takes these beautiful but kind of sad pictures of abandoned places, and he often focuses on the textures and patterns of dust.
I'll have to look them up. So dust can be a source of inspiration for artists, a way to explore deeper themes. What about in different cultures? Does dust have any special meaning?
Well, in a lot of cultures, dust is linked to the idea of humility and how temporary life is. You know that saying, from dust you came and to dust you shall return?
Yeah.
It's a reminder that no matter who you are, you'll eventually return to the earth.
It makes you think about what really matters, for sure.
And in some spiritual traditions, dust is seen as sacred. It represents the basic building blocks of creation itself.
It's amazing how something we usually try to get rid of can have so much meaning.
I know, right?
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. We've gone from dust bunnies to the birth of stars.
It's been quite a journey.
So before we wrap things up, what final thought would you leave our listeners with?
I'd say this. The next time you see a speck of dust, like in a sunbeam or something, take a moment to really appreciate it. Think about where it came from, what it's made of, the stories it might be carrying. You never know what you might discover.
I love that. It reminds us that there's wonder all around us, even the smallest things. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of the world of dust. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering all those amazing things around you.